The contents of this podcast are for informational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. If you have a specific health concern or condition, please consult a qualified healthcare professional for more details. Check out herguru.uk/disclaimers.
A great story teaches us something about being human. I'm Cheryl Paris, and this is Work Stress Anxiety. Together, let's borrow a little wisdom from a story to help us navigate a very modern world. Have you ever noticed that some people don't have to say anything before the whole room changes? One person walks through the door, conversation stops, people sit up straight, someone suddenly becomes fascinated by the little doodle that they've just made. It's almost as if the room collectively holds its breath. Today isn't really about Harry Potter. It's about something much more common. It's about the managers who confuse fear with respect. Hi, and welcome to Work Stress Anxiety. I am Cheryl Paris. Welcome if you're new here. If you're listening because work has started following you home, if meetings replay themselves inside your head while you're trying to fall asleep, or if you're brilliant at your job but somehow keep wondering whether you're actually the problem, you are in exactly the right place. Before we start, I just want to say thank you. Whether you've been here since my very first episode or you've just discovered the podcast, I'm genuinely grateful that you've chosen to spend these minutes with me. Every message I receive reminds me that none of us are struggling in isolation. So let's take you to a Thursday afternoon. It's just after 2:00, so everybody should be back at their desk. Lunch is finished at this sheltered housing scheme. Residents have wandered back to their flats. The staff are chatting while they're waiting for the afternoon meeting to begin. It's one of those ordinary afternoons that no one expects to remember. The atmosphere is relaxed. People are making cups of tea, eating too many biscuits. Someone wrestles with a photocopier while it seems to have some sort of personal vendetta. You know, photocopiers. People are actually smiling, and today's meeting is supposed to be good news because the organisation has agreed to invest in the building. There's talk of an expansion, an in-house hairdresser, a regular podiatrist, better facilities. Nothing dramatic, just practical improvements that will genuinely make life better for the residents, and everyone feels quite optimistic. Then the area manager walks in and everything changes. Nobody announces it. Nobody says, "Here we go." The room simply shifts. Conversations stop halfway through. People straighten their backs. Eye contact suddenly becomes optional. One of the managers there is a lovely lady called Tony. Tony's 40 years old. Excellent, truly excellent at what she does. Because the residents trust her, families ask for her. You know, she's that sort of manager who solves problems quietly before they become everyone else's problems. The meeting starts. Tony answers a question. Then she's criticised publicly. Not over something dangerous, not over poor care, not even over anything particularly significant, something tiny, something that could quite easily have been dealt with privately. And that's when something struck me. The criticism wasn't really about correcting a mistake. It was a performance, a reminder to everyone else in the room about who held the power. Funny thing about respect, it rarely arrives looking like silence, but fear does. And think that's where so many workplaces get the two, I think, completely confused. So, where does this leave the meetings? Let's just leave the meeting for a moment, because what happened to Tony isn't unusual. In fact, it's one of those life lessons. That's exactly why it's worth talking about. Most workplaces don't have a Voldemort, or is it Lord Voldemort? Now, don't get me wrong. I appreciate there are some people who just, for whatever reason, they've had a bad time in life, but honestly, they just literally suck the positive energy out of any situation. Not that I'm trying to be judgmental here. It's just that I've seen it so many times how one person can just literally suck the energy out of a room. Me. But they have someone whose ego arrives about 30 seconds before they do. I'm not talking about someone who's evil. No, I'm not. Most people aren't evil. I'm talking about the manager whose mood becomes everyone else's weather forecast. People check their face before they check their diaries. You know, you've worked somewhere like that where you can tell what sort of day it's going to be just by the sound of someone's footsteps in the corridor outside. And after a while, you stop noticing you're doing it. You become an expert at reading those tiny signals, the sigh, the folded arms, the raised eyebrow, the email that simply says, "Can we talk?" 5 words that have ruined most evenings that most people care to admit. And here's what I think is so fascinating. Your nervous system loves patterns. Its favorite question isn't, "Am I happy?" It's, I think, "Am I safe?" If criticism has become unpredictable, your body starts scanning for danger before your conscious mind has even opened the meeting agenda. Maybe that sounds familiar. You rehearse what you're going to say before every meeting. You read the email 3 times before pressing send. You apologize for things that you don't actually need to apologize for, not because you've suddenly become less capable, because uncertainty has quietly become exhausting. And this is one of the biggest myths, I think, about overthinking. People think of it as a personality flaw. I don't. I think overthinking is often what your brain is doing. It's almost like it's trying to hold some sort of committee meeting. You know, every version of you wants to have a vote. One says send the email, another says rewrite it. Another part of you says, well, what if she reads it in the wrong way? Another part of you says, okay, perhaps wait until tomorrow. Nobody can agree. Nobody. So nothing happens. Not because you're indecisive, because your brain is desperately trying to stop you making the wrong move. And that's why is the committee meeting happening? Because somewhere along the line, your nervous system learned that getting something wrong carried a heavy cost, a cost that you perceived as heavy. Maybe it's embarrassment, maybe it's criticism, maybe being made to feel small. So now every decision gets referred to the committee inside your head. Unfortunately, you know from your own experience, committees are famous at making, as you know from your own experience, I think it's fear wearing a, because real leaders don't shrink the room, they expand it. It creates enough psychological safety for people to disagree, ask questions, admit mistakes, well before they become big problems. And yes, to me, fear is expensive, not just for the individual, but for the whole team, the organization. People just stop sharing ideas. Innovation dries up like some dried leaf. Problems that are there are start getting hidden, mistakes get covered over. And the ironic thing is that that leader is trying the hardest to stay in control, often ends up receiving the least honest information, which as a leader is crucial. You need honest information. And this is where most of us accidentally, I think, make things harder for ourselves. One of the things that I've noticed, we start measuring our own worth through someone else's behavior. She spoke to me like that. He ignored my idea. I mustn't be very good, maybe. But before you sentence yourself, let's just widen the camera here, because there might be another explanation that you've never been taught to consider. What could that be? Well, imagine you're no longer sitting in that meeting. Instead, you're standing quietly at the back of the room. Just imagine that for a moment. You're not trying to escape the situation. You're simply trying to see more of it, more of what's going on. Because stress has a really annoying habit of zooming the lens right in until all we can see is ourselves. When you step back 3 or 4 paces, metaphorically, something interesting happens. You start noticing things you couldn't see when you were emotionally right in the middle of it. You notice that other people have stopped contributing. You notice nobody challenges the manager. You notice experienced staff suddenly become very quiet. The picture even gets bigger. And here's something I've learnt over the years. Individual moments can be very misleading because we all have bad weeks and bad months and bad years and bad days. But patterns really are. One difficult conversation might seem to be a bad day. The same pattern with everyone week in, week out tells a very different story. Patterns are evidence. That's why detectives look for them. And that's why we should too. So instead of asking, what's wrong with me? Try asking yourself this as you stand there observing what's going on. What pattern am I actually looking at? Because they're very different questions. One assumes guilt before you've gathered any information, and the other asks you to become curious, just a little bit curious, before you become self-critical. Okay, so here's a sentence I'd love, absolutely love for you to remember. Someone else's behaviour is data. It isn't automatically my identity. Say that again. Someone else's behaviour is data. It isn't automatically your identity. Because if you remember nothing else from today, remember that, please. So here's an experiment that you might want to try this week. Become a detective, not a prosecutor, not a defense lawyer, just a detective. When something happens that knocks your confidence, I want you to take a moment and write down 3 things. The 3 things are: question number 1, what actually happened? The facts. You know, is it Kipling's number 6? Kipling 6? Who, what, why, when, how, where? I can't remember them. But use that as a guide. Only the facts. Imagine the meeting was recorded by your own personal security camera. No assumptions, no mind reading, no filling in the gaps, just what actually happened. Question number 2, what evidence says I genuinely handled this badly? Notice I said evidence, not feelings, evidence. Then question number 3, what evidence tells me something about the other person's behavior? Because that's evidence too, and we often forget to collect those things. Okay, so before we finish, let me leave you with these 3 thoughts. What do I hope? So before we finish, let me leave you with these 3 thoughts. What do I hope you understand now? What I hope is that you understand that your nervous system isn't making you weak. It's trying to keep you safe in an environment it has learnt might not be so. What can you stop blaming yourself for? Every emotional reaction that you have to an unpredictable leader, that reaction makes sense. And what one thing you can try next? I invite you to become curious before you become self-critical. Become curious like the detective. Remember, some managers build confidence, others collect fear. I want you to know the difference because your confidence is way, way too expensive to leave in someone else's hands. Like Andy, my friend, often says, don't let anyone live in your head rent free. So if today's episode resonated with you, I'd love for you to follow the podcast at followthepodcast.com/work stress anxiety so that you never miss an episode. And until next time, remember, someone else needs to feel powerful. Until the next time, remember, someone else's need to feel powerful isn't evidence that you're powerless. So every step you take, no matter how small, is a step towards a brighter and more balanced future. Trust in your journey and remember, progress is progress, no matter the pace. I'm Cheryl Paris and thank you for listening to Work Stress Anxiety. Bye for now. I hope today's episode gave you something useful to carry into your week. Now finish your coffee, take a breath, and remember, progress is progress, no matter the pace. Until next time, bye for now.